It was 1:40 a.m. on July 29th, 2016 when 16-year-old Antonio AJ Armstrong called 911 while hiding in the closet of his bedroom. The panic-stricken teenager told the dispatcher in a helpless tone of voice, "I just heard 2 gunshots in my parents' room. Will you please hurry?" When police arrived shortly after, he ran downstairs and turned off the alarm to let them in. When they went upstairs, they discovered that Antonio Sr. and Dawn Armstrong had in fact been shot in their bed and pillows had been placed over their heads. Hello and welcome back. Today I'll be talking about the disturbing case of AJ Armstrong Jr., a teenager who was put on trial not once, not twice, but on 3 different occasions for killing his parents back in 2016. Please like the video and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this to be injected straight into your YouTube feed. I'm your host, Greenman, and this is the Murder Encyclopedia. Antonio Armstrong Jr., commonly known as AJ Armstrong, was born on the 3rd of March, 1998 to Antonio Armstrong Sr., a former NFL player, and Dawn Armstrong. The Armstrongs embodied the quintessential idyllic American family, brimming with faith and values. Dawn and Antonio, both 42 years old, radiated the kind of relationship that inspired admiration from other couples. As of July 2016, they were nurturing 3 intelligent, outgoing, and accomplished children. They also showcased their entrepreneurial spirit as proprietors of a local gym chain. Antonio, a motivational speaker, commanded respect stemming from his noteworthy football career. He had played for both the Miami Dolphins in the 1990s and previously for Texas A&M. Their weekends were dedicated to activities at Antonio's mother's church, where he served as an assistant pastor. Meanwhile, Dawn frequently engaged in volunteering and chauffeuring her kids to various practices. She took immense pride in her enduring 18-year marriage and placed her family at the forefront of her priorities. The family's unwavering dedication bore fruit, as glimpses from their Facebook photos portrayed a joyous life filled with beach getaways, luxurious automobiles, and exclusive private school education for their children. However, on the 29th of July 2016, that perfect life fell apart. That very day, AJ called 911 at about 1:40 a.m. and told dispatchers that he heard a gunshot coming from his parents' bedroom. When the authorities got to their home on Palmetto Street in southwest Houston, they discovered his parents had been shot while sleeping, and both had pillows covering their heads. AJ's mother, Dawn, died on the spot from 2 gunshots to the head. His father, who was immediately rushed to the hospital, died there from a single gunshot to the head. At the time of the incident, the only people at home were AJ, who was 16 years old at the time, and his younger sister, Kyra, who was 12 years old. AJ admitted to waking his sleeping sister after he heard the gunshot. When he was questioned, he strongly asserted that a masked intruder had broken into their house and committed the heinous crime. However, the investigation seemed to suggest a more disturbing sequence of events. The police did not find any sign of forced entry, a fact that the home security system did not prove otherwise. For them, this meant one thing: the killer came from within, and not from the outside. A .22 caliber pistol which belonged to Antonio Sr. was found lying on the kitchen counter, with no DNA or fingerprints, alongside a note. The note simply read in block letters, "I have been watching you for a long time. Come get me." A bullet hole was found in the ceiling of AJ's bedroom, which he concealed with a sock. He later admitted to authorities to have made the hole weeks prior while showing off to his 2 friends. Bullet holes were also found in his pillow and blanket, almost like he was practicing how to shoot something. Police later noted that fresh material from the ceiling was found on the floor, so he couldn't have shot the hole weeks prior. It had been recent, and if not the case, then his parents would have noticed it. Shooting at his pillow and blankets was deduced to be a sound test. How loud would the shooting be? Will it be loud enough to wake his sister or the neighborhood up? That night, the police, in line with their findings, coupled with the fact that an upstairs motion detector detected movement at 1:09 a.m., barely 30 minutes before the 911 call, arrested AJ that night as a suspect in the wake of the horror that claimed his parents. Surprisingly, the Harris County prosecutor made an application to try AJ for murder as an adult. In the meantime, AJ spent 7 months in juvenile prison for a crime that he vehemently denied committing. "Jail was very, very hard," AJ said in an interview. "I mean, many sleepless nights just not being able to be around my family, only having 10-minute phone calls a week. Like it was just very hard. And hearing my little sister on the phone, it was just tough to deal with because I wanted to be there for everyone." After a lot of deliberations, the application was later granted and AJ stood eligible to be tried as an adult on the charges of capital murder. Consequently, in March of 2017, he bonded out of prison while awaiting trial. However, his trial didn't happen immediately. Besides, on the surface, it wasn't like the case against him was strong. After his parents' murder, no sign of gunpowder was found on him. His fingerprints and DNA were not on the murder weapon, and there was none of his parents' blood on him or his belongings. In fact, it seemed that all the evidence against AJ was purely circumstantial. So how would this play out in court? Barely a year later, while awaiting trial, AJ's defense filed a motion to the court, praying that the murder charges would be dropped on the grounds that the prosecutor withheld important evidence for more than 18 months. The evidence in question was a voice recording of a statement made by one Maxine Adams, who was a close friend to the deceased couple 6 months before their death. In the statement, Maxine was reporting to the police that her husband and Antonio Sr. were running a prostitution ring, adding that they were receiving death threats. The prosecution denied withholding evidence. According to them, they had given the defense the name of the woman, and they had ample opportunity to chase her claims. On the other hand, Kay Winston, Antonio Sr.'s mother and AJ's grandmother, raised eyebrows at the fact that the police had not investigated the death threats against her son. She said it wasn't easy for her family to make public Maxine's claim that her son was allegedly involved in dealing with a prostitution ring. The family was reasonably wondering if the couple's death had anything to do with whoever made the death threats. For all accounts, AJ's grandparents and the rest of his family believed in his innocence and stood by him. The court did not allow the motion to have the murder charges against AJ dropped, and his first trial, which was set to be held on the 29th of March, 2019, started with a jury selection that made the headlines. A quarter of the 120 prospective jurors admitted to Judge Johnson to have seen AJ's case through news outlets. 12 jurors and 2 alternates were selected and the trial began. However, less than 1 month later, the court, in trying to deliver a verdict, arrived at a mistrial due to the inability of the jurors to reach a unanimous decision after a 48-hour deliberation. 8 of the jurors believed AJ was guilty, and 4 believed he was not guilty. The court set a date for AJ's second trial to begin in October of 2019, but it was postponed to January 2020. Days before it was set to begin, it was postponed again after more than 30 motions were filed in the case. Finally, AJ's second trial was held in October of 2022, and his defense lawyers came armed with better ammunition than before. AJ, now 22 years old, married to his longtime girlfriend Kate Ober, and with a son, sat for another grueling trial. His defense averred that a possible and stronger suspect in the murder case of his parents would be his elder half-brother Josh Armstrong. The defense attorney served up medical records that pointed at Josh's mental instability and his schizophrenia diagnosis. Josh, at the time of the incident, was living a few blocks away from his family's house. On the night of the murder, he was supposedly with his girlfriend, but the girlfriend only testified to seeing him after she was awoken by the news of the parents' death. She could not say for sure if Josh was sleeping beside her before that, as she was deep asleep. Kyra Armstrong, now 18 years old, stated during her testimony that Josh had vacated the family house 2 weeks before the homicide, following disagreements with her parents, and that there was a notable shift in his behavior. It was as if he physically existed, but his presence was emotionally absent, Kyra remarked. Although the defense tried to accuse Josh of being the murderer, prosecutors called forensic experts who testified that the crime scene was too organized to have been the work of someone with schizophrenia. The defense attorney, however, was far from done with their case submission. They raised the issue of the security system supposedly not recording any entrance into the house that night. Kyra called the family's home security system very finicky. She went further to add that the system normally misbehaved and would sometimes go off when nobody entered the house. She also testified that it would sometimes not go off at all, even when someone entered the house. The prosecution's stronghold was under attack. After all, it was the issue of the security system not recording any entry that lent substance to their case. By going with what Kyra said, that would mean that someone could have entered the house, and the security alarm might have chosen that moment to be finicky. Following the former argument, one could also argue that Josh committed the murders because he had an intimate knowledge of the house and the security system. Again, the prosecution wasn't done yet. Remember that the motion detector had detected movement around 1:09 a.m. on the day of the murder. The prosecution adduced evidence that showed AJ chatted with his girlfriend that night, and that phone records showed they only stopped talking around 1 a.m. which is coincidentally the time the detector came on. Prosecutors called security company ADT's head of product testing, Tim Rader, to testify. Rader walked jurors through records of the Armstrong family's home security system on the night of the murder. Based on the records, no doors or windows were open at that time. Rader testified when questioned by the prosecution. Records show motion detectors first detected activity overnight upstairs. When prosecutor John Jordan asked where the only place that person could have came from, Rader replied, the second or third floor. However, the defense was as prepared as ever. They had evidence, in line with Kyra's testimony, of over 77 distinct errors in the security system report in July 2016 alone when the murder happened. There was over 128 estimated failures of the system detecting movements in June and July alone. In essence, the defense affirmed that the security log was unreliable, and the assumption that AJ was detected by the motion sensor at 1:09 a.m. should be struck out. After the closing argument, it was time for the jury to make their decision. After another grueling 48 hours of deliberations, they arrived yet again at a deadlock. 8 of the jurors believed AJ was innocent, while 4 believed he was guilty, which is the exact opposite of the result of his first trial. The court once again declared a mistrial, and a third trial was set for July of 2023. It's now been 7 grueling years of walking up the Harris County Courthouse, and AJ was positively anxious to be declared not guilty, understandably so. In May of 2023, jury selection began, and the process took up more than 150 hours. 12 jurors were finally selected, 6 men and 6 women who would be deciding AJ's fate. In June, new blood evidence surfaced. 2 spots of blood were surprisingly discovered underneath a Houston Police Department visitor sticker on AJ's shirt. Had the blood been there ever since? If so, how come it was only being found out now? The July trial started with new evidence. The prosecutor came on stronger by putting Houston Police Department Lieutenant Jimmy Dodson on the stand to talk about the discrepancies in the interviews following the 2016 killings. Dodson stated that when AJ was interrogated after the killings, he only commented on hearing gunshots. As for whether there was an intruder or not, that was a fact that took AJ 6 hours to mention. Dodson said AJ was very happenstance, very stoic during the interview. He said the teen was not emotional at all, even after they told him that his mother was dead. Dodson also said Armstrong Jr. never circled back to the masked man he supposedly saw in the house. Back to the blood evidence. The officer who placed the visitor sticker on AJ's shirt while he was handcuffed back in 2016 testified in court saying that he did not see any blood on AJ's shirt back then. Following immediately were 19,000 pages of message evidence dissected from conversations AJ had with his parents before they died. Attorney John Jordan for the prosecution spent more than 2 hours reading dozens of texts to jurors from the 5 months texts leading up to the murders, including texts from Dawn Armstrong to AJ, in which she tells him several times, "You are a liar," claiming he lied about his grades, about smoking weed, and sneaking out to see his girlfriend. Other texts are grossly similar and mostly evidence of how manipulative and deceptive AJ was. Most of the texts depicted AJ telling his parents one thing and then telling his then girlfriend, now wife, the very opposite. Depending on how the jurors choose to interpret the conniving, conflicting stories, it could either be a case of a teenager simply telling white lies, or perhaps one with a much darker and sinister intention. In the light of new evidence and a better perspective of the case, closing arguments were made and the jury once again sat in another deliberation. On August 16, 2023, AJ Armstrong was found guilty of capital murder and was immediately sentenced to life in prison, with a possibility of parole after 40 years. AJ has been transferred to state custody and will be sent to the Byrd Unit in Huntsville, Texas, which is where male inmates who are given the death penalty or sentenced to life in prison for 50 or more years serve out their sentences. In response, AJ and his family have filed a federal civil lawsuit against the city of Houston, claiming in the suit that the Houston Police Department planted blood evidence to sway the third jury and help manage to get a false conviction against him. Is this case really over, or will there be more to it than meets the eye? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because there's a lot more where this came from, here at the Murder Encyclopedia.